All right, let's start by reading this article together. Youth on every continent united in strikes to demand climate action. Young people from more than 150 countries skipped school in a show of unity on Friday, September 20th. It was part of another series of global climate protests. They urged world leaders to act more quickly to combat climate change. The protests started in Australia, where an estimated 300,000 young people in the cities took to the streets. Similar scenes soon began unfolding in towns and cities across the globe, from small island nations such as Kiribati to booming cities like Mumbai, India. Protesters gathered in small groups in Africa and in swelling masses in European capitals. In London, England, thousands marched by the Houses of Parliament. Some held signs saying, "Winter is not coming," and "I'm taking the time out of my lessons to teach you." Martha Lickman, a 13-year-old Londoner, clutched a sign that read, "Oceans are rising, and so are we." "We're doing our bit, eating less meat, using less plastic," she said, "but it's still on the government to do something." Outside Washington, D.C., students at Montgomery Blair High School in Silver Spring, Maryland, walked out of class. They prepared to meet other protesters near the Capitol building. World leaders will meet for climate summit. Police escorted students on a 50-mile walk to the nearest train station for the ride into the U.S. Capitol. Maddie Graham, age 16, gripping a red and white megaphone, shouted with hundreds of her classmates, "Whose future? Our future." The protests had monumental turnout that stretched across every continent. Still, it remains unclear whether the high-profile demonstrations can fundamentally alter the global forces contributing to climate change. Can elected leaders be compelled to make the difficult choices necessary to halt the world's warming? Transformative change is precisely what those behind Friday's marches have demanded. This includes a swift shift away from the fossil fuels toward clean energy. It also includes halting deforestation, protecting the world's oceans, and embracing more sustainable agriculture. The strikes came 3 days before world leaders were set to gather at the UN on September 23rd for a much-anticipated climate summit. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has insisted countries promise to reach zero emissions by 2050. These promises could include reduced government funding for fossil fuels such as oil and coal. It could also mean halting the construction of coal-fired power plants. Carbon dioxide is created by the burning of fossil fuels for energy. This causes more heat to get trapped in the atmosphere. "I told leaders not to come with fancy speeches, but with concrete commitments," Guterres said last week. Youth puts pressure on their leaders. The UN summit will offer a key test of the world's nations. Many countries came together to sign the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. This meeting will show if the countries can actually follow through on slashing carbon emissions as rapidly as scientists say is needed to avoid the worst effects of climate change. The Paris Agreement, reached by nearly all of the world's countries in France, aimed to fight global warming by cutting carbon emissions. A generation of youth are also adding to the pressure to cut emissions. They are demanding that leaders take the problem more seriously and act more swiftly. The Friday demonstrations came more than 6 months after hundreds of thousands of students staged a similar coordinated effort to demand urgent action on climate change. Among the largest of the protests was likely the one in New York City. It was led by 16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, who testified before U.S. Congress last week that nations must take unheard-of actions to cut their carbon emissions in the next 10 years. "I am submitting this testimony because I don't want you to listen to me," she said. "I want you to listen to the scientists, and I want you to unite behind the science, and then I want you to take real action." Protesters in climate-conscious Germany planned more than 500 events to mark the global climate strike on Friday. The demonstrations in Germany come as Chancellor Angela Merkel's government faces increasing public pressure. Germans want bold new laws to fight climate action following heat waves and protests dubbed Fridays for Future. Germany's governing parties were holding a special meeting on Friday. The government is trying to finalize a new set of climate protection laws. Strike events planned in all 50 states. In Moscow, Russia, Arksha Makishan, is a 24-year-old violinist. He says he was inspired by Greta to stage a one-man protest after the government reached his rejected his request to hold a group demonstration. I thought climate change was just science, but Greta had the right words to explain why it should worry all of us, he said. Russia, which has been hit hard by climate change, ranks as the world's fourth largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China, the US, and India. In Copenhagen, Denmark, several thousand people, most of them high school age, gathered. People flew Danish flags that were green and white instead of red and white. I hope the politicians hear us. They don't really seem to be doing anything, said Albe Gills, age 18, who skipped school. In the U.S., strike organizers expected events in more than 1,100 locations in all 50 states. In San Juan, Puerto Rico, strikers marked the second anniversary of Hurricane Maria, which scientists say was made more destructive by climate change. The strikes were planned largely by teenagers between soccer practices and homework. However, a number of adults offered support. Public schools in New York City and Boston granted students permission to skip school for the strikes. For students in other districts, more than 600 physicians signed a doctor's note. The permission slips read, "Their absence is necessary because of the climate crisis."
Climate crisis in totality is destroying my future. And I don't think we can hope to have jobs or have a nice future when our existence on this earth is not guaranteed.
We need to do something, yet I'm seeing that the people in charge and the people who are running our country aren't doing anything. To me, this is confusing, so I'm here today to step up and say no more.
This was just the beginning, that we would keep striking, keep taking action, and do everything we could to avert this crisis. And today shows that we have followed through with that promise. And we will never back down.
All right, let's take a look at this article. The youth on every continent united in strikes to demand climate action. Again, we're going to just note when this article was released in 2019. So this is less than or right around 6 months ago. Just diving right into the article. First of all, this is an image from some of the protesters in London, England. And as we go through this article, I want us to note a few things. First of all, just starting off, when I first read this and it says that young people from more than 150 countries skipped school, I had to stop and think, is that a lot of countries in comparison to how many countries are in the world, or is that just a couple? Like, are there thousands of countries? I had no idea. So I'm guessing you don't have a good idea either. And so I want you to pause the video and I want you to Google it. And then I want you to come back and write down the number here. How many countries are actually in the world? What's the total number? Because then that will tell us, is this a lot of the countries that we're looking at, or is it just a few? But these people come together in unity back on September 20th. And then some of the things that I thought were interesting was just to note the countries that are mentioned, or the places that are mentioned. So in this next paragraph, we have Australia being mentioned. And they had over 300,000 young people. We have Kiribati, which is just a island nation. We have Mumbai, India, which has a ton of people that live there. We have groups in Africa, and we have groups in Europe and across that continent. Keep going down. They're going to list some more. Here we go. We have London, England being mentioned. That's a European area. These students marched in front of the Houses of Parliament. These are just their government buildings. for their nation or their country. Things that I think are interesting too are the ages of some of these students that are participating. We have a 13-year-old Londoner. This just means that they are from London. Okay, if we go to the next page, we have students from Washington, D.C., so that's here in the U.S., right? And these protesters are marching near the Capitol building. This would be the U.S. Capitol, the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. We saw in the video prior to this annotation of these students with the megaphone, right, shouting out this chant, whose future, our future. And the goal behind this, if we get into this portion of our text, is that they want these demonstrations that to fundamentally alter or change the global forces, the big guys who are in charge, right? And fundamentally alter means at the base level or at the core of it all, something is changing. So, I don't know where to, let's see. Let's write this up here. So change at the base level. Okay, and then they use this word transform, oops, excuse me, that was sloppy. Transformative change, right? So transformative change means that it's total change or complete. Okay, some of the things that they are wanting to create change in is this shift away from fossil fuels. And I had to look up some of these fossil fuels, right? These are things that naturally occur. These are natural. Oops, I'm going to zoom in. Natural fuels, things like coal or gas. So those are your fossil fuels. And then they also talk about something being sustainable agriculture. This means that it's something that can be around for a long time. It lasts longer. All right. I'm not sure if all of us are aware about what the United Nations is. This is a government organization that includes several nations around the world. So this is a government organization. And they are committed to maintaining peace and security. Peace and security. All right. And their goal is to, in one of their last meetings, that these countries promise to reach zero emissions by 2050. And some of these could include that if they create this promise or meet these promises or commit to the promise, right, that they would reduce government funding for the fossil fuels. And here they mention again, such as oil or coal. The reason they want to do this is that this carbon dioxide is created by when they burn these fossil fuels for energy. Then when they do that, right, this causes more heat to get trapped into the atmosphere. And this is causing what they say is global warming and creating a problem for our environment. Guterres, who is the Secretary General of the UN, he wants them to come back with concrete commitments. This means that he wants definite answers. from these various leaders. All right, and so the meeting that they are, so the UN is going to, this meeting that they are having is going to offer a key test of the world's nations, right? And this meeting that they're talking about here is the UN meeting on September 23rd. So this is after those protests occurred. And if they, in this last paragraph, it says the Paris Agreement reached by nearly all of the world's countries in France aim to fight global warming by cutting carbon emissions. Again, this is this stuff up here. Oops, where are we at here? Oh my, let's try that one more time. So these carbon emissions are up here, the heat that gets trapped into the atmosphere. All right, let's keep going. We'll move through this last part a little bit faster. In this paragraph, this next paragraph, it talks about the demonstrations that are occurring, and it's basically saying that they had 2 protests in 6 months. Okay, and then again, this next portion, it talks about a young lady named Greta Thunberg, and she testifies before the United Nations about the severity of global warming and climate change. And she's from Germany, and there's several, right? We have another country here listed. They planned more than 500 events to mark the global climate strike on Friday. So they're a very passionate country about the different things that are going on and about global warming. So here is Greta's portion of her speech in front of the United Nations. Sorry, here we go.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
All right, so go back to our article. So that was a portion of her speech before the United Nations. And this article ends with talking about some more events that are planned, more strikes that are planned. So take a look. And we have Moscow, Russia. We have a 24-year-old violinist who's wanting to stage a one-man protest. We also have Copenhagen, Denmark, and we have several thousand people that are going to be a part of different demonstrations there. We additionally have the United States, and we have San Juan, Puerto Rico. So we have over 1,000 locations in all 50 states that are being marked with plans for a strike. All right. As we finish up this article, the last thing that I want you to do is flip this last page over, and I'd like for you to create a T-chart that looks like this. So on one side, I want you to write the claim, we currently live in a dystopian society. And on the other side, I want you to write the claim, we do not currently live in a dystopian society. And then I want you to be able to support both sides of the argument with evidence or proof. So it can be text evidence from this article that we just read, or it can be a thought that you have after reading this article. What can you come up with that would support both sides? Even if you don't agree with one, can you put yourself in the other point of view and the other position to come up with evidence to support that thought process or that claim? All right, so create this T-chart on the back of your article and then fill that in. And when you are done, don't forget to take a picture of your article to turn in, your completed article, and then I want you to staple this into your notebook.